of hockey now in Orissa, the World Cup things, the Orissa.
Hockey is there. Still, you are with the education department in Odisha?
Yeah. I advise. I'm honorary advisor to the CM here. Then I go to National Institute of Advanced Studies sometimes and keep on moving. 6 years after superannuation, we can keep on moving. Yeah, there is Popli. Great. What a familiar get together. That's nice.
Namaskar, Popli Saab.
I think, Michael, you are the only new one to us. That is, Manoj has brought you newly. Otherwise, we all know each other. And welcome to this group. It's a good group.
I just tried to send you through the chat the link, but the chat is not open, so I cannot reach the chat.
Oh, sorry. Manoj, your chat has to open. Oh, I can give you my mobile number. We can be in touch. Would you like to write down?
I can. Do you have a LinkedIn profile?
Oh, I have, but I don't use it. Yeah, you can put my name. We'll get it. Yeah, there'll be one. I don't know whether.
Okay, the chat is. I think the chat is open right now. So.
Okay. Part, yeah. But Twitter, I think I'm more active in Twitter. Yeah. So, Poppy Sahab, sab theek thaak hai?
Yes, sir. Everything is fine, sir.
Iswaran Sahab, so many books. What are these books? You have kept them so neatly? So, Poppy Sahab, sab theek thaak hai?
Yes, sir. Everything is fine, sir.
Mr. Iswaran, you are on mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The books, Iswaran Sahab.
Yeah, those are it's a virtual bookshelf, but I do have a real bookshelf as well behind.
Okay.
Just a minute, I'll show that to you.
Yeah, Swatish, please admit James.
The virtual looks real, and the real looks virtual.
Here it is. Blue, I hope.
Yeah. No, your virtual looks better. Please put the virtual one. It looks really better.
Hi, James.
Hi.
Morning. How is everyone?
Hi, James. Nice to see you again. I met you once virtually earlier, Upendra. Yeah.
How's everything in India?
Climate-wise?
Just generally.
Climate-wise, I said. Yeah, North India is having a spell of a cold, severe cold, and South as usual better. I speak from the east coast of India, where unusually it is not a good winter. We used to have some cold, some this thing. It is not this year. So little warm for the winter that we usually have.
Good.
Which part of, where are you speaking from now, James?
From the northwest of England, near Manchester.
Oh, okay. See, the Prague, England, India, I mean, the virtual reality brings us so close.
Yes, so it's normal winter weather here, which is cold and wet.
I know.
So, and in the summer it's slightly less cold but still wet. So.
True. Yeah, recently I was in a place called Mussoorie. I mean, last week only to give a lecture, and 20 years down the line, Mussoorie never used to have been fans. It was a hill station. British people discovered and put it there. Today, everybody uses air conditioners.
Really?
Yeah. But for the first time, I stepped out of my guest house and I found snow outside. And now, of course, winter they use for warming, and but summer also they use AC. That was I was told by the driver who took me from the airport, and he was telling, and he told the rivers are dry because dams have been built and the perennial rivers are all dry. And he was talking like a highly concerned climate expert, saying that everything has gone haywire. The cooling, the heating, the rivers, and the hill station itself is scared, Yeah. And now, of course, we read that there are cracks in some of the cities in the Himalayas, including a famous place called Josimat, where many houses have developed big cracks, and partly it has to do with the, floor going down, the seismic thing, and a lot of other things, human activities also, perhaps.
We had for the first time ever over 40 degrees centigrade in the UK, and none of our infrastructure is designed for that heat.
40 degrees Celsius?
Yep. 40.2, I think it was the peak, which is about 1.9 degrees higher than our previous record, which is massive. So, the UK infrastructure is designed for mediocre weather. So 40 degrees, above 28 degrees, British people start spontaneously combusting, our trains melt, those types of things. So they reckon 40 degrees is going to be every few years now, which has a big impact on how we run the country.
You have to have an emergency plan, and they have to import fans and air conditioners to cool it down at home.
I think the emergency plan is moved somewhere else. I think that's
yeah. No, that is really, it will be chaotic. Yes, Manoj, you are in time now. 1 more minute to go.
Yeah, Dr. Kritika, please start.
We cannot hear you, Dr. Kritika.
So sorry. Yeah. Hello, everyone. So just starting again. So welcome to this panel discussion on Scope 3 emissions and its role in net zero transition. So I will first share a brief presentation, then we can start the discussion. I hope you can see the slideshow in full screen.
Yes.
Sorry, just a minute. Yeah. Okay. So Net Zero Think was founded about exactly 1 year back with the main aim to help decarbonize the business system. So our main aim is to help private and government organizations from MSMEs to SMEs to identify their long-term climate risk, help them become net zero, and also achieve long-term sustainability. So climate change is now finally, everyone has come to a conclusion that it is already there. Climate crisis is already there. There are a lot of effects happening, extreme events happening all across the globe, including droughts, floods, and all these cascading effects also have feedbacks which amplify the climate change effect further. So during the last COP in Glasgow, COP26, as well as in Egypt, all these countries have decided across all sectors which amplify through the society to provide NDCs or net zero targets. And one of the way to achieve their net zero is through carbon or greenhouse gas accounting. So what exactly is greenhouse gas accounting is, we are trying to understand a company, for example, what emissions occur in that company, whether it is scope 1, which is direct emissions from the company through their operations and processes, or if it is scope 2, which is electricity or steam which are purchased or indirect. Unfortunately, scope 3 is a type of scope which is generally ignored by most of these companies because they are not sure how much it contributes to this. And unfortunately, if I show you, if you can see the screen, scope 3 is actually more than 50% in majority of the sectors. Not all sectors, but at least most of the sectors have scope 3 emissions, which contribute to more than 50% of the emissions. So scope 3 is very important. Now the scope 3, as you can see, is part of both the upstream processes, that is where you purchase raw materials, you transport these raw materials, your employees travel, there are business travels, etc. And there are certain scope 3 emissions which are part of the downstream process. So this include your distribution of your products, your sales of these products, your end of life treatment of these products, the waste disposal, etc. So Net Zero Think as a company provides certain scope 3 offerings. What we try to help companies understand about scope 3 is how the company is committed to their ESG policy. We help them develop sustainable procurement policy. We help them engage with their supply chain. And we also map these emissions across the entire supply chain. And then we also help them establish targets so that they can improve their ESG reporting. Now, there are other services which Net Zero Thing also provide, and these include these mainly focus on the three key pillars of decarbonization. So you have measure, where you measure your GHG accounting, your coverage of emissions, you set baselines and targets. Then you have reduce, where we look into how we can streamline these operations, how we can improve these operations, how can we improve the renewable energy output. And the third pillar is the offset. So here we try to provide solutions like nature-based solutions, and we also ensure third-party or assurance credit. We also help companies with science-based targets initiative. Now, these science-based targets initiative is a global movement where we use to determine the coverage of emissions under the three scopes. We help them set near-term and long-term emission reduction targets. We also submit these targets, and then we monitor these targets and communicate these targets as a form of report. Now, we also provide carbon credit solutions. Here, we try to help them finalize the methodology, the preparation of project design documents, help them validate, monitor, and verify these carbon credits. We also provide energy solution both in the renewable energy as well as other value-added services, and green hydrogen and storage services. Now, in the last 1 year, Net Zero has taken positive strides in the green hydrogen space through feasibility studies and technology analysis. We've also been integral in the development of tools for helping in via GHG accounting, ESG reporting, as well as techno-economical model of hydrogen and ammonia production. We also provide companies with ESG reporting and sustainability services through benchmarking, monitoring, and framework development. So, with our multiple collaborations with different other companies, we are hoping to continue this journey further and help save this planet together. So So the main purpose of this seminar is to create awareness among stakeholders about what exactly is scope 3 and other indirect greenhouse gas emissions. How can we map this across the different sectors? And if you want to achieve India's short-term, long-term emission reduction targets, how does scope 3 help achieve these targets? So we'll start with the first introductory keynote address, which will be provided by Mr. Upendra Tripathi. Mr. Tripathi is the former Secretary of MNRE, as well as a founder and first Director General for the International Solar Alliance. He is also appointed as the advisor cum working president and chairman of Executive Committee of Odisha Adarsha Vidyalaya. Mr. Tripathi, you can take over now.
Thank you, Kritika. And I think I can say, friends, it's a pleasure to be here. Not only because Manoj has been very active in arranging these webinars, but this area is actually very critical. As I mentioned last week, I was there in a place called National Academy of Administration, This place is in Missouri, and this is a training ground for all the administrative officers of India. When they get selected, they go to this place, and they're trained for 2 years how to be good administrators. And I met 180 officers of this service called Indian Administrative Service, who were from different provinces of India. In fact, these officers work both in the federal government as well as the provincial government. So they have a lot of experience. And I was speaking to them on net zero. Now, I'll just take a very simple, very few questions that they put. And first thing somebody said, why do we call it net zero? In fact, he went a step ahead. He said, this gives the impression that ultimately we are neither going to do something positive or negative. It is going to be net zero. So that struck me that, yes, of course, somebody else said that net zero is that we neutralize or decarbonize whatever carbon is man-made or carbon equivalent, let us say. And in the discussion, somebody else pointed out that this lacks, the net zero concept lacks a time dimension. Now, are we going to make it net zero, that is neutralize or decarbonize the carbon effects of human beings on the climate, only up to, say, 1980 or 1965 or 1860s or the pre-industrial age? So one of them who was good in chemistry, in fact, he went a step further. He said, look, in the pre-industrial atmosphere, we had some 245 ppm of CO2. Now we have some 445, almost double. So is there a specific number where net zero will make us reach? And is there a period when we are going to reach net zero? Of course, I told, look, 137 countries have already announced about net zero, mostly 2050, China by 2060, India by 2070. But I couldn't answer to that question. Is there a deadline when we are going to be net zero? And is there a time dimension? We are going to be net zero with what base market, if that is adequate? Because, if we're actually trying to undo the negative impact on the climate due to human action, we should reach down to the pre-industrial level, which is 245 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere. And there was another interesting question. It was about a Nordic country, which was giving a lot of money to an African country to promote coal mining, to buy trucks to carry coal. And the same country also operates a very big airlines. So the question was, now, is that country responsible for, this framework? Do they have responsibility for financing, which actually results in the enhancement of carbon in another country, and but the globe has no borders? Now, I couldn't reply to that either, because I don't think today we have really, some agreed formula internationally which says, look, these are the activities, which will come within the scope of net zero. So the whole point was, and the impression that many administrative officers had that A, the concept is not clear. B, it doesn't have defined boundaries, guidelines, timelines, and all that. But I'm told, things are not that bad. Actually, Manoj was telling me before that we have some guidelines, although not very strict guidelines to define net zero, but a lot of things that needs to come. But that is only the global frontier, how we can actually agree to a common concept of net zero and define a timeline that to what extent we are going to decarbonize the carbon impact of human beings. But all said and done, the times are urgent and things have to be done. And one thing is about COP 27, 28, 29, we discussed last time, the loss and damage principle was adopted. First, it was not in the agenda. It took quite a few days to bring it to the agenda. then it was a very good thing. They took a decision, and the decision is that, we will discuss something next year. So that is a macro level decision making. We can't actually replicate the Montreal Protocol in every field. Montreal Protocol was a rare success, but we don't find Montreal Protocol coming to a World Methane Protocol or World SLCP Protocol or a net zero protocol. Although a net zero protocol in the pattern of Montreal Protocol may tend to be much more successful because there is some inspiration behind. But whether we have a net zero protocol, a global protocol or not, net zero edge, Manoj has put that company which really looks into the grassroots details. It talks about you pick up any institution and you look into the scope 1, the direct, the more complicated scope 3 and less complicated scope 2, but it makes us able to analyze the actions of a particular organization. And in the Indian context, of course, the guidelines of SEBI do recommend it, but we still don't have a compelling norm to go for it, a legal necessity, which may come because India has agreed that it will be net zero by 2070. It has put a technical committee, and there is a lot of talk and action about net zero. And it is gaining a lot of momentum because of the renewed emphasis on green hydrogen. India had announced its solar mission in 2010 to quantum jumps of 100 gigawatt of solar and then 175 gigawatt of renewable. And now, India has announced about 500 gigawatt non-fossil fuel. Given this background, it is very critical that all countries, including India, they develop a workforce now who can be called, the net zero army. Like when India brought in the solar mission in 2015, when the part 2 came, we trained 57,000 skilled workers called the Friends of the Sun. They were essentially field level engineers. They were trained for a 6 months course, but they helped the industry to spread solar. And now when we are talking about net zero, we are taking, we are moving both sides. We are moving deeper vertically, and we are moving far and wide horizontally. Because, when we talk about net zero, we talk about not only energy, which of course plays around 73% of the critical role, but we are also talking about agriculture. We are talking about forestry. We are talking about land use. We are talking about waste management. And of course, we are talking about industry, wherever, GHGs or greenhouse gas emissions are coming. So energy use in industry, transportation, and energy use in buildings, for example. So if we look at the scope of net zero, it is much broader, much wider than the scope of solar. And so the solar friends that India trained 57,000 people, we need maybe 570,000 people in India who should be trained in all these areas where they could analyze, stress, work, educate, and manage the net zero concerns. For example, agriculture. How do we identify, to become net zero by 2070 in India? What does it mean? What changes we need in agriculture? What changes we need in forestry and land use? What changes we need in the waste sector? And what changes we need in industry, apart from pushing, green hydrogen or green ammonia as a, storage or a energy medium. So if we look at the sector, specific requirements, both in terms of institutional arrangements, new technologies, and the manpower, a lot has to be really done. And it opens a lot of scope. It opens up opportunities for investment, for deployment of new technologies, for manpower training. And it's a serious responsibility for all countries, including India, where to have a net zero economy, we have to move in those fronts for bringing change in land, labor, capital, and management. I'm not going to the traditional things that, we need trillions of dollars of investment to become net zero. But ultimately, it's inevitable that we bring in technology, we bring in finance, we bring in renewed manpower, restructured manpower, so that we realize net zero, not only in the narrowest sense that we neutralize or decarbonize the carbon impact of human beings currently, but we go back right up to the pre-industrial time where the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere was 225 or 245 ppm. Thank you, Manoj, for having given me this opportunity. I'm so happy to meet all my old friends here. Thank you, and all the best. I only wish you develop an app where people can, use that app to work out scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. I don't know whether it will help your company, but it will help mankind a lot. Thank you. My old friends here.
Thanks, Mr. Tripathi, for this wonderful introduction. Yes, you have raised some very interesting points, including how net zero economy is not just a single movement, it's more like a movement across different sectors, different levels of society, and at different areas as well. And regarding tools and apps for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, I think we'll have an interesting discussion on that as well during our final panel discussion. So before we move on to the final discussion, I would just like to introduce the panel members. So we have Mr. Sikri, Mr. Sikri comes with over 4 decades of experience across different variants in the energy and environmental sector. He's been associated with the International Foundation for India's Energy Transition in a Carbon-Constrained World. He's also one of the director of the Pan Asian Renewable Private Limited, which was a joint venture amongst NTPC, ADB, and Kyuden International Corporation, Japan. He is also one of the members of the Program and Project Evaluation Committee of the ISA. Currently, he is leading our team as the Director for Energy Solutions at Net Zero Think. We then have Mr. James. He is the founder of CBN Expert, which is an online platform which basically provides seamless tools for greenhouse gas accounting across different sectors and within the UK as well as outside as well. So this tool helps us understand how we can do the different GHG accounting across the different scopes and how we can compile them and assimilate them as a single over a single dashboard. Then we have Mr. Manoj Kumar Singh, who is the founder and CEO of Net Zero Think. He has more than 1.5 decades of experience in the renewable energy and climate change field. Then we also have Dr. Pranamika. She is a very strong background in atmospheric sciences, specifically in the field of air quality, including inventories and air quality emissions. So before we start the discussion, just a gentle reminder for the panelists to be aware of the time limit for answering each question so that we don't drag it too much. Also, the audience can provide additional questions in the chat box. Please enter the question along with the name of the panel member to whom you're addressing the question to. Okay, so we'll start the panel discussion now. The first question is actually to Mr. Sikri. Mr. Sikri, how do you see, as an expert or a person with a lot of experience in the energy sector, how do you see the Indian energy sector and the renewable energy sector for assessing scope 3 emissions, and how can they strengthen their supply chain?
Thank you. Thank you, Kritika, and thank you, Manoj, and a lot of regards to Dr. Upendra Tripathi, actually. He has given me an opportunity to work in the International Solar Alliance and the transition period of the carbon. Regard to Upendra, sir. As far as energy solutions are concerned, energy solution basically provides overall from the start of the business to the sustainability business. In this journey as energy solutions, we are come across the energy transition index. You know, everybody knows about that. Okay, the World Economic Forum has already done this energy indexing system for, I think, more than 150 countries, and we are lagging behind in 2000. I think 2021 it was 87. But prima facie, the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, we are lagging behind in every industry, the scope 3. We know scope 1, we know scope 2 as a electricity generation or power generation. But as far as scope 3 is concerned, basically we called the scope 3 as a emission of the value chain. It is known as the value chain emission because the someone has a scope 3 emissions. This may be as a scope 1 and scope 2 for the other companies. We call this up, just like Kritika told actually, we call it the upstream and the downstream of the organization. Now come to the renewable energy and the energy transition. We everybody knows that the renewable energy either through the wind or through the solar or geothermal or biomass or somewhere, it plays a very vital role for the decarbonization, or we can say like that it is a area where we can work upon in a greater way. Now the conditions come to the offshore wind, the area which we have worked. Ocean we love to work on this renewable energy transition. And hydrogen, of course, everybody knows. The hydrogen mission has been declared and hydrogen budget has been declared by the government of India. I want to share this. Okay, when we say the mapping of scope 3, it is very similar than we measure our blood pressure, or we measure our sugar, or we measure our weight, and then we can improve upon it. Similarly, when we measure the mapping of scope 3, because the scope 3 is a category where we directly not involved, but the supply chain mechanism is involved in the scope 3. In the scope 3 also, we like to upstream and downstream, where Dr. Upendra Tripathi has said the waste generated by the operation. Then we have the employee commuting transport system. This all few sentences we have to look into it by the mapping of this. Dr. Upendra Tripathi has raised a question of the timeline for the net zero. Sir, actually, we would like to, as a energy transition, this net zero through the villages, if area-wise we have selected, we will start with the net zero in one village, then in one town and one industry particularly. And then we come to a cross with up to 270, the net zero as a whole, as a country is concerned. But we have initiated to the net zero villages to start with that. To the end, actually, the energy, renewable energy and the energy transition, it is a so much balanced figure, because we can't say, okay, we fossil fuel we have to done away. We can't done away with the fossil fuel, because the electricity generation to the fossil fuel, not of the economical point of view, but the other technology mix point of view is very important. But slowly and slowly, the impact of this, just like we can say the fossil fuel, the 30 years or 35 years old plant can be, or the non-performing plant can be shut down, just like in Panipat in India, Haryana, we have shut down the 4 plants. The transition between the fossil fuel to the renewable energy is a step. We are getting a large step over these issues, and slowly we can come to a net zero area, net zero India actually. Thank you very much, gentlemen. My time is over.
Thank you, Mr. Sikri. So, just moving on from Mr. Sikri's comments regarding Scope 3 emission mapping. So, this question is addressed to James. So, James, you're an expert on online platforms for GHG accounting. And you know the online platforms have been increasing over the last few years, and I think the future is going definitely is digital and everything is online. So regarding carbon accounting or greenhouse gas accounting, how do you ensure data quality and management for scope 3 emissions when you, especially if you're doing an online platform, creating an online dashboard? How do you ensure data quality? How do you ensure the gaps or rather reduction in gaps for scope 3 emissions? And does this change with sectors? I mean, you would have had experience with multiple sectors. Does it change based on the industry, uh, the data quality, the data management, or what's your opinion on that?
So thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this. I think data, its quality, consistency, and accuracy is the biggest single challenge that companies face when looking at scope 3. If you look at the two categories, I guess groups of categories of scope 3, upstream, the carbon embedded in everything you buy, and downstream, the carbon emitted as a consequence of everything that you sell, then especially downstream becomes difficult to calculate because it's governed by the principles of like for like and fair share. So when you look at different sectors, a lot of the greenhouse gas accounting is much more easily applied to traditional sectors like manufacturing. So I buy components, I do something with them, I put them into a product, and then I sell that product. That product has a life, and at the end of it, it has a treatment at the end of its useful life. When you're different sectors such as lawyers, professional services, there's a perception that you are clean as an industry, and therefore scope 3 doesn't really apply to you. But the concept of use of sold products, the industries and sectors that you support, those have to be calculated. So the first step really is to map the processes that you undertake in the business, and then to align the scope 3 categories to those. So that's a good starting point. The second point is, what data do I have? What data can I get hold of? A lot of companies start with financially calculating carbon emissions through environmentally extended input-output tables. That's a good way to start to understand the magnitude in each sector. A lot of the EIO tables are out of date or aren't directly applicable to certain sectors. And really, once you've got that magnitude, it's very difficult to do anything about it, because all you've got is 10 million pounds is 1 million tons of carbon. You can't see the detail. So ultimately, a company has to, one, accept the responsibility for scope 3, understand which parts of its emissions are priority and material to its overall impact, and then put together over time a data management plan that starts to put more accurate, consistent and relevant data in place for it. And it takes time. I haven't seen a single company of any size, of any sector, that can truly say it's able to map all of its scope 3 emissions in detail. So it's a journey. You have to start and then make progress year on year. Hopefully that answers the question, Kritika.
Yeah, thank you. Just a continuation of that question. So what you say is to ensure quality of data, and so basically the companies have to find out which part of their sector, I mean, which part of their company is emitting or the largest percent of scope 3, etc. So basically they engage with the entire supply chain, whether it's upstream or downstream. So how does supply chain engagement improve scope 3 emission? I mean, just to help others understand what exactly is supply chain engagement, and how do we ensure supply chain engagement that it can help us improve scope 3 emission calculations?
Okay, so supply chains clearly vary for every different company. Companies that are highly international with multi-level complex supply chains, it becomes very difficult. But ultimately, if you look at most companies, the top 10 to 50 suppliers is the lion's share of their spend. And then what we work with is companies to say, which of those suppliers do you have any influence over that are strategic to your business? There are certain suppliers, AWS, Microsoft always come up, that if they're one of your suppliers, you have no influence over them, no matter how big they are, because they've already set their plans out. But then you take those critical suppliers, understand where they are, what commitments they've made, what proportion of your emissions do they contribute to, and then start working a supplier by supplier plan to say, how do we jointly start working to, one, understand the emissions, where they are, and then put a science-based target aligned plan to reduce those down. And ultimately, there isn't really any alternative than doing that analysis and then starting the hard yards to actually make a real difference. And ultimately, it comes down to not how do we find the emissions and offset them, but how do we actually work a plan that mitigates and prevent those emissions from being emitted in the first place. Some of that might be actions that the supplier takes. Sometimes it might be how the supplier and the customer work together. So the world has set just-in-time deliveries as the best way to run supply chains. That may not be the best way for carbon emissions. So we're talking to some of our manufacturing companies about what the trade-off would be about putting a bit more stock into their supply chain and having less just-in-time deliveries and reducing the number of transport miles that they have as well. So all of these things are really important, but unless you get into the granularity on a case-by-case basis, it's almost impossible to really look at the emissions and get rid of them.
Okay, thanks, James. So the next question is to Mr. Manoj. So we know Scope 3 assessment is important for any company if it wants to reach its net zero target. How do we improve or scale up the Scope 3 emission assessment, especially when we are developing net zero pathways across an entire sector?
Yeah, thanks, Kritika. So very rightly, this question you have asked. Without reducing Scope 3 emission, net zero as per 1.5 degree scenario cannot be achieved. So Scope 3 is going to play a very important role. There is a growing urgency to reduce GHG emissions wherever possible, and which includes reducing Scope 3 emissions, Scope 1, 2, all the emissions, whatever we are talking about. And to date, most of the company have been focusing only on reducing emission under their direct ownership or operation control, which is basically Scope 1, Scope 2, purchase of electricity, heat and steam. So these are the areas where everyone is right now focusing on, or they have started journey to move forward. But the indirect emission and upstream and downstream emissions, which are related to the value chain, these things are so far people are struggling to get accounted for. And most of the sectors, these emissions make up majority of the company's inventory, as you have already mentioned in your presentation slide. And this differentiation is between the emission sources for accounting purpose has often been used by companies as a justification for not taking responsibility of Scope 3 emission, as they fall outside of the company's direct control and ownership. So they have something to say, okay, we don't know the things, we don't have control over that, so we are not thinking about that. So, but it should not be the case. The lack of direct control and difficulty, collecting in the data, which is creating barrier, that should be, addressed. Despite the challenges of addressing this indirect emissions, Scope 3 not only has a huge potential to prevent the worst impact of the climate change, but it also lead to substantial business benefit, for everyone. So we are only looking, negative or gray side of Scope 3 and giving the excuse, but we are not looking the positive side, what it will evolve for everyone, and what substantial benefit people will be getting out of this. I'll be giving you some reduction levers what everyone should look into, especially to reduce the scope 3 emissions. The first lever is business model innovation. Whatever business we are doing, there should be some price on carbon. If suppose we are emitting anything, there should be certain price which need to be paid. We should also look for increasing the product lifespan. Whatever the product we are manufacturing, how we can increase the lifespan of that, so that emission can be reduced. We should also look for product like efficiency and other stuffs. Next thing is supplier engagement. So engaging with the supplier so that they can reduce their emissions, ideally in line with the climate science. What James was mentioning, as BTI is one of the best practices, which is being popular everywhere. So that can be taken as a base. We should also look for procurement policy changes, like whatever the procurement policy is there in the company, that how to improve the policies. It should be in line with the net zero goal of the company. We should also look for product and service design. So at designing level itself, lots of innovation can be done. So we should start looking on those aspects. Customer engagement, whatever the customer and consumers who are using up the product and services, how they can reduce their emissions. That is another area what can be looked into. Operational policies, these are the other areas which is very much important. And then investment strategy. Whatever the investment we are doing, it should be done in the low carbon projects and companies, which will increase the resiliency and shift investment from fossil fuels to accelerating transition of this low carbon economy. So these are the key areas which need to be looked into to improve the improve the scale scale up for this net zero transition. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Kritika.
Thanks, Mr. Manoj. So we'll just slightly deviate from the general technical aspect and we'll go into more the social aspect. So, Dr. Pranamika, with your academic background, what is your opinion on how educational institutions can help increase awareness about greenhouse gas accounting and scope 3 among different levels of the society?
Thank you, Kritika. So, at the onset, I would like to congratulate Net Zero team for successfully completing 1 year. And now my answer is we have seen that educational institutes are committed to educational and research and have been playing significant role in preparing responsible graduates from in schools also, from school to higher education. We have seen that incorporating environmental education have been done in India or throughout the globe. So what we have seen, after COP15 pledges, the focus of the whole world is now curbing GHG emissions in order to reduce the concentration of GHG. So it is done at various organizational level, corporate level, or throughout the through various global commitments and pledges. So companies, the organizations and industries who have committed to be net zero by 2030 or by 2050 haven't taken a pledge to be carbon negative or in compliance with the Paris Agreement, they need to measure their GHG hotspots, what we are saying like scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. So these are the hotspots of greenhouse gas from those companies. So what we are lacking, we need skilled professionals for those activities to be perform. So these stakeholders of the company must be educated or trained on the protocols and standards of GHG accounting and other sustainability reporting. So here the educational institutes could play a significant role in capacity building through skill training and in sustainability transition across the organization by generating skilled human resources. So for my first point is like number one, what I think is incorporating skill-based courses like GHG accounting, then sustainability reporting frameworks, and sustainable business processes, then supply chain management, then carbon and environment management. So it can be these courses can be incorporated along with their regular interdisciplinary courses like natural resource management and environmental science, public policy, anthropology, like that. So, so imparting such courses among the students and professionals from corporate world will help them advancing in their career path in sustainability transition and upskill the students to proliferate their career options and creating human resource for green jobs, which is a hot topic these days. Like green jobs are coming. So, having said that, I want to mention here that our Net Zero team is coming up with a certificate course and training for skill development in areas like climate change, GHG accounting, and BRSR reporting, which will be available both offline and online mode. And we are also ready to collaborate with higher education institutes also for capacity building training conduction. So this is one part by developing skilled based professionals or students, and another one another way how educational institute can help is like they should start assessing their own carbon footprint at scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 level. So there are benefits of accounting at educational level because we have seen that this focus is only for corporate level and industries and all. But while doing at educational level, it may bring benefits like number one, it will help the institute achieving or becoming more sustainable institute among the peers. And number two will be like when the students or the employees will be positively engaged with the whole process of accounting, then they become more aware of their own carbon footprint, and this will create, I think, a significant impact on people's perception on like what we are saying, like climate change and environment, and thereby they can track their own activities which are harmful to the environment. So educational institutes may go for like scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission accounting within their institute. And like here I would like to mention some of the scope which can be considered, like for example scope 1, they can consider like stationary consumption, then refrigerants, vehicle fleet. Then scope 2 may cover electricity purchased or generated within the institute. Then scope 3 will cover like purchased goods and services, capital goods, fuel and energy related activities, transportation and distribution, then employee commuting, student commuting, leased assets, then processing of sold products. So these are some of the categories which are included in the scope 3. So studies have shown that over 250 universities and institutions have joined a voluntary pledge called Net Zero to develop a roadmap towards making their campuses carbon neutral. So for example, IIT Delhi has achieved its milestone by reducing its carbon footprint by more than 50%. And globally also like 1050 universities from 68 countries have made resolutions to reach net zero emission by 2050. One university like Yale University has already started their scope 3 emissions accounting. So what we can conclude here that GHG footprint assessment courses on training conducted at the educational institute level it could create skills and knowledge among the students, whereby they can take part in various green jobs in the recent years, or green jobs. Apart from this, it will increase the level of environmental awareness among the population, and provide a baseline to be associated with to measure the impact of future policies and technical measures to reduce consumption, and associated with GHG emissions. And when assessment will be carried out at the institutional level, then it will increase environmental awareness among the students and the population and the staff as well. So I think my answer can means what you have asked. I can relate to that. Yeah, I could answer those questions. Thank you, Kritika.
Thanks, Dr. Pranamika. Okay, so the floor is now open for questions from the audience. So we already have few questions from Michael, addressed to all the panel members, so anyone can answer. So he has few questions. One was, don't you think preventing carbon emissions would deliver better results than actually calculating the emissions? What are your opinion of that? I mean, I think he's asking whether mitigation is better than reporting or something like that. Am I right, Michael?
So I'll take that one. So the answer is mitigating emissions is critical to getting to net zero, and having a world economy that has a balanced interaction with the planet is absolutely fundamental. The old adage is you can't manage what you can't measure. So yes, mitigating is key, but if you don't have a clear understanding of what and where, you can't put plans in to mitigate emissions. So yeah, it's a bit like putting calories on a menu, is you don't know what the bad food is unless it actually tells you, and then within that, you really need to understand the details. So using that analogy, you might think a salad's good and the salad leaves are good, but the dressing's really full of fat and really bad for you. So yeah, the ambition has to be mitigation, but people need visibility to be able to put the correct actions in place to get mitigation as an outcome.
And Michael, if I can add on, the classical thing is prevention is better than cure. So if you can prevent, nothing like it. But the present world that we exist, where we have met 27 times in COP, we're not even able to measure. And so in my opinion, the first one is the best policy if you can prevent. But given the imperfect world that we are in, and having given that so many things have failed, including Kyoto Protocol, we have to measure it. And the best thing will be if we can agree how to measure, what to measure, and with what finality. That also today we don't have a consensus on those things. But measurement is quite critical both ways. Whether you prevent it, at least you know how much you have prevented, and that requires measurement.
Thank you very much. Generally, the last question which I put there was, what is the other word for emission? One word. If you would like to say with other word the word emission, what it will be?
I don't have one, Michael.
I think that the word is waste, because emissions are waste.
Yeah,
and
right,
this is what, this is what we are speaking about the prevention. But if I enter a company, everybody said we have solved it. We have waste management company, and nobody tried to prevent waste happening. And that's a question that we spend more money into the calculation and analytics than into the prevention. Recycling is not waste prevention, because you have to create waste to manage it and call it recycling. But that's not I was in a room full of 1,000 people, and I asked them in Europe, I asked them, who of you recycle? 1,000 hands rise up. And I told them, sorry, you are lying. You do not prevent waste happen. You just sort the waste, but that's not recycling. And I fear slightly that a very similar situation is right now happening with the carbon emission trading. You know, we are trading emissions for decades, and they are still growing because we do not try to prevent them to happen. And this is why I think that the approach, yes, measurement is important. And this is why generally we prefer to do something which is visual. You cannot see the carbon emissions. The company cannot see what they prevented. The people cannot see what they do. But if you tell them, don't buy the new phone, don't create so much waste, they can touch it. And from the waste, we are on the scope 3. Because all these 3, if you do not do it, it will not be there. So that's just a point.
No, I think it's a very valid point, Michael, and I think it touches on a much more fundamental issue, which is the mindset of us as individuals. And I think especially in global north, that we massively overconsume. It is where we demonstrate success is by overconsuming. I think in global south, there is a general kind of, we want to overconsume like global north does, and we should be allowed to do that. And I think it comes down to your point is, you know, I've got teenagers, 2 years after they get a phone, they want the latest phone, and they don't want to be seen with an old iPhone 12. And I think it is much about mindset. And I think there are two things: is people still need to understand the impact. They need to be able to say, I'm buying an iPhone and that has this impact on the environment, which they can't see at the moment, which you're quite right in. And then I think that there is the positive side of it is saying, I proudly walk around with an iPhone 6 because I'm doing it to minimize the impact on the environment, rather than I'm walking around with an iPhone 14 to impress my friends. And I think it's fundamental to solving the problem, but it's multi-generational to try and wean us off this fact that consumption equals success. And you look at Instagram and all of those types of things, and it's people with consumption that get all the recognition. So I think it's exactly the right thing to do. How we get there, I think, is really hard.
If you dare, I would like to share. Sorry, okay, Mr. Sikri, sorry, you have the word.
One thing I would like to add, Michael, the strategy for any mitigations, it starts from the measurement only. When you measure and you find out the gap, and then you find the strategy for mitigation. If you don't measure, or if you don't, you are very rightly said that emission is a waste. We agreed. But waste is a natural phenomena. Everywhere there is a waste. It's not only carbon, it's not only anything. Waste is the prima facie, is a natural phenomena by the God. The waste will be generated. How to mitigate? It is a first step to measure it. You measure it and find 80-20 formula, where is the 20% of your carbon emission by the impact of the 80%, and 20% is the areas where you can find the mitigation strategy, long-term, short-term strategy. What is the cost involved? What should be just like carbon capture? We are doing research for the 20 years for the carbon capture. Is a one example. But Michael, you have very rightly said, and Dr. Upendra has very rightly said that prevention is better than cure. But prevention up to which level, and how prevention can be done? You measure and then prevent it. Thus, you know your sugar level is high. Then you measure it and you do exercise, you do some tablets of so and so. Michael, your question is very vital for the society and for the whole of the which are doing, or these sector specialists, they are doing which is net zero or the carbon emission. Thank you for your good question, actually.
Michael,
Yeah, I think, Kritika, please.
Michael,
Yeah,
sorry, I was a student in a small university in Ottawa called Carleton University, and my professor raised the same question, except that he said in 300 years back, there was a scientist in France who told the same thing. He in fact told before we polluted the earth, he told, look, he got patents for using solar rays, the so-called solar photosynthesis. Nobody cared for him. The patents just, rotted because we're in a hurry, when we ran out of oil, we got kerosene. When we ran out of kerosene, we got coal. So we're in a hurry. And in 300 years, we have put 1 trillion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. So your question, and that 300 years back, the French scientists who warned mankind saying that, look, use solar. Not much of a difference, but yes, even if from tomorrow, we all, surprisingly agree with you and we will say, okay, we will generate no waste. We will not use fossil fuels. But what do you do with the 300 trillion or 100 trillion, the 1 trillion tons of carbon we have already put during last 300 years? So it's a good thing, but I wish human nature and the present civilization would have been that way. It wasn't. 300 years back, we made a choice, and that choice has resulted in this mess, and that mess has to be set right.
Okay, thanks everyone. Due to time constraints, we might have to move forward. There are 2-3 more questions and comments, but I think I can send it personally to the members later so they can answer it accordingly. But I will right now move towards Mr. Popley, who's the former chairman and managing director of Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency Limited, IREDA, to provide the concluding remarks and as well as a vote of thanks for this discussion.
Thank you, Kritika, and thank you, Mr. Manoj, for giving me this opportunity to put concluding remarks and vote of thanks. I think he wanted to take me as a panelist, and then since I was not available, he said, okay, let us not emit him, let us not waste him, let us use him for the concluding remarks. So that is one good thing. It was very nice to listen to each one of you. I think Kritika did a good job in presenting what Net Zero is doing from measure, reduce and offset, and that they are providing services in greenhouse GHG services, greenhouse gas accounting and ESG services, and also for green hydrogen services. So this is what Net Zero is doing. They're doing a great job. Then it was, as usual, always very interesting to listen to Upendra Tripathi sir. He in his own style tells everything. I think the best way he covered Net Zero, it is all sectors have to be covered. We have to decarbonize all the sectors. That is what is very, very important. And we may measure in our own sector. We require measurements in our own sector. But then eventually we have to decarbonize all the sectors so that we reach ultimate net zero. It's not on the basis of one product, as he has very rightly said, we have to. And also, we also see what lot of emissions are being absorbed back by ocean and by agriculture and forests. And that brings you to the net zero thing ultimately. And today there are 8 countries which are net zero because there the industrial activity is not much. And there is a lot of green cover over those countries. Those are small countries, but then step by step we have to achieve that. Coming to Mr. Sikri covered on the RE sector and how to tackle scope 3 emissions. Mr. James addressed on the potential data gap, because that is the most important thing. How do you, because there could be gaps in data which are extremely important to measure, and especially for scope 3, because scope 1 and 2 you can easily measure, but scope 3, all the logistics you have to measure, which becomes little difficult, but yes, effort can be made in that direction so that we know where we are. Then Mr. Manoj gave quite few suggestions on how do you improve on scale up scope 3 emissions. Business model innovation he talked about, which is very, very important.
I think there's been some issue with Mr. Popli's connection.
May I use the moment and share with you the waste prevention legislation? Just one slide, just for you to think about. I spent 8 years to write this document, and it was globally launched on September 1st, 2021. So let me just share it on the screen. It takes me 8 years to write this document. And 3 days after the launch.
I think, just let Mr. Popli conclude. He is back now.
Yes, please.
After that, you can, take.
Okay, so I will.
Yeah, Mr. Popli, please.
You just got me.
Popli, you have to unmute.
You are,
Sorry, my battery got off for iPad. I'm very sorry. So I was talking about he talked about increase in product life cycle, increase in efficiency, procurement policy changes, etc. And then Dr. Pranamika talked about capacity building, what Mr. Upendra Tripathi had talked about, that we need an army of net zero army. Because when he was secretary, he talked about Surya Mitras, and 57,000 Surya Mitras were trained. And exactly what is required today is a net zero army, because the concept doesn't go down easily with the companies. And once you have those net zero army, what Manoj is spearheading, it's a good thing that he's doing. And we talked about, and she also talked about capacity building, pledge the companies have taken. We had also talked about pledge when we were doing solar mission. It was his brainchild to go for 1 lakh megawatt of solar, and that is how 175 gigawatt came into. And then government has stepped it to 475 gigawatt today. And then she also talked about stakeholders to be trained. And that is what Mr. Tripathi in his initial remarks had said, that is what IAS officers, trainees, they were talking about. And that is all. I think a lot of things were covered in this session. I think audience would have understood, and thanks also to Mr. Michael for raising some very pertinent questions and making it more interactive. And I thank each one of you, each of the panelists, especially for their remarks. Special thanks to Mr. Tripathi for his critical remarks initially, and to Kritika for framing very, very appropriate questions to all the panelists, and of course to all the audience who have taken out time to listen to this very important webinar. Thank you. Thank you once again to Mr. Manoj. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, sir. I think Mr. Michael could share now his screen and share his thought. I think over to you, Michael.
Thank you. It will be shared in a minute, just a moment. It can be sent to all of you if you want to. We have it in, or I send it to Manoy already. I send it in Hindi and in the second Indian language. And generally, I would like to say that in the meantime, I spent this 8 years writing, and in the meantime, I published over 3,000 articles. The key about this waste prevention legislation was that it is applicable for everyone, everywhere, from a small scale of personal interest up to the global governments, because all these points are valid and applicable. And if in Industry 5.0 we speak about waste, we don't mean just the physical waste, but there are 5 categories: physical, social, urban, process, and wasting of time. So if you would like to, please make a screenshot or get connected with me on LinkedIn is the best way. And I can send you the original, and probably I have it in your language as well. So that's just the end. What I would like to share with you, because I think this is important. What is interesting that not a single legislation in the world, a single government defined how waste is being created. So the process of creation waste, which is generally wasting, but not a single legislation has this wasting defined in a law. That's interesting. Okay, thank you, and sorry for disturbing.
No, good. Very good. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. It is a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It was, I think, a very good session. Yeah, over to you, Kritika.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you everyone for this fruitful discussion. I'm pretty sure if people at least understood the fundamentals of scope 3, how it can help in different levels, how can we scale it up. So hopefully people will use this as a stepping stone to go forward in how they report their emissions in the future. So let's take this forward, and hopefully we'll have more such discussions in different other topics as well. Thank you all. Thanks everyone.
Happy actually.
Thank you.
First year of your existence.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, and have a nice time, free of waste and wasting in all its forms. Stay safe and free, all of you. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you. Thank you so much.